Okay, this is the Chapter 2 review. On number 1, make a conjecture about the next item in the sequence. So the next item in the sequence would be, let's see, 3 plus 2 is 5, plus 4 is 9, plus 6 is 15, plus 8 is 23. So plus 10, the next item in the sequence would be 33. Because our conjecture would be that each item is the next consecutive even number more than the previous item. So we're adding consecutive even numbers to the previous item. Number 2, make a conjecture about the next item in the sequence. 7 over 8, 9 over 10, 11 over 12, 13 over 14, 15 over 16. So we're just increasing the numerator by 2. So 15 plus 2 would be 17. And the denominator by 2. So 16 plus 2. And therefore we have the next item. 17 over 18. Number 3, determine whether the conjecture is true or false. Given angle 1 and angle 2 are complementary angles, then the measure of angle 1 is equal to the measure of angle 2 is equal to 45 degrees. Okay, so let's back up. Angles 1 and 2 are complementary angles. That just means that they have to add up to 90 degrees. So we could have two angles such as 30 and 60, which still add up to 90 degrees, and those two angles are not both 45. So this is a false conjecture. They don't both have to be 45. They could be something else. Determine whether the conjecture is true or false. Number 4, given triangle LMN has two congruent sides, then conjecture LM has to be congruent to MN. So let's draw an isosceles triangle. So two congruent sides. Now based off of how we label this triangle, this is not necessarily true. So we could have, let's see, something like this. And if we look at LM and MN, those are not the same length. In this case, MN is congruent to LN. So just because it has two congruent sides, LM and MN do not have to be those two congruent sides. So this is a false statement. For number 5, find the next two terms in the sequence. So we have 1024, negative 256, 64, negative 16. So first of all, we notice that our items are alternating their signs. So we have positive, negative, negative. So our next two items would be positive, then negative. Also, if we take this first term and divide by 4, we get the next. Divide by 4, the next, divide by 4, and so on. So we're dividing the previous term by 4. So if we take 16 divided by 4, that would be 4, and 4 divided by 4 would be 1. And once again, the signs are alternating, so this item would be positive, and this item would be negative. So 4 and negative 1 are the next two terms. And number 6, identify the hypothesis and conclusion. So the hypothesis will follow the word if, the conclusion will follow the word then. So if 4x minus 3 equals 29, then x equals 8. So 4x minus 3 equals 29 is our hypothesis. Then x equals 8, so x equals 8 is our conclusion. Number 7, write the statement in if-then form. Smoking makes you less fit. So we need to interject the words if and then in there appropriately. and being less fit depends upon the smoking. So that would be the conclusion. So we would say, if you smoke, then you will be less fit. Once again, we want to write the statement in if-then form. Octagons have 8 sides. We would need to put a word in there so that it makes sense. So if the figure, so I'm adding the word figure, if the figure is an octagon, then it has 8 sides. Number 9. Given the statement, if you live in Chicago, then you live in Illinois, which of the following is true? The negation of the statement. So we don't need to worry about that one. The inverse of the statement. So inverse actually exists. We would negate the hypothesis and negate the conclusion. So it would read, if you do not live in Chicago, then you do not live in Illinois. That would be false. For example, if you do not live in Chicago, so let's say you live in Peoria, then you do not live in Illinois. Well, Peoria is in Illinois, so you would live in Illinois. So that's why the inverse of the statement is false. The converse is when you switch the hypothesis with the conclusion. So it would read, if you live in Illinois, then you live in Chicago, which is also false. Once again, counterexample, you could live in Bartonville. It says, if you live in Illinois, so yes, Bartonville is in Illinois, then you live in Chicago. No, you live in Bartonville. So that's why the converse is false. Then we have the contrapositive. So the contrapositive is when you negate the hypothesis and the conclusion, and you take the converse of that, so you switch it around. So it would read, if you do not live in Illinois, then you do not live in Chicago. And that, in fact, is true. So, for example, if you do not live in Illinois, which means you'd have to live in another state, then you do not live in Chicago. Correct. If you're living in another state, there's no way that you would live in Chicago, which shows that the contrapositive of the statement is true. Number 10, write the inverse of the statement. If a trapezoid has congruent legs, then it is isosceles. So our inverse is where we negate the hypothesis and the conclusion. So if a trapezoid does not have congruent legs, so once again, the inverse negates the hypothesis, negate the conclusion. If a trapezoid does not have congruent legs, then it is not isosceles. So for 11 through 15, we'll use the diagram. Which option states the postulate that can be used to show that A and F are collinear? So there's A and F, and they are collinear because through any 2 points there exists exactly one line, which is A. Through any 2 points there is exactly one line, so they will be on the same line, even though there's not a line in the diagram. Number 12, which option states the postulate that can be used to show that D, C, and E are collinear? So D, C, and E, if we look in our diagram here, and they all are on the same line, so we know that a line contains at least 2 points, so it's okay for there to be 3 points here. So a line contains at least 3 points. Oops, sorry. A line contains at least 2 points. A line contains at least 2 points, therefore 2 or more. Number 13, which option states the postulate that can be used to show that lines AD and EC intersect at point D? So AD and EC, and the diagram does show that they intersect at this point right here, labeled D, which is true because if 2 lines intersect, then their intersection will be a point. Let's see, if 2 lines intersect, then their intersection is exactly 1 point. Okay, number 14, which option states the postulate that can be used to show that A, B, and C are coplanar? So A, B, and C, they are non-collinear points. They're not all on the same line, and we know that through any 3 non-collinear points, there will be a plane that goes through them, so they will be coplanar. So let's see, through any 3 points, wait a second, no. Through any 2 points on the same line, no, through any 3 points not on the same line, so that is non-collinear, there is exactly one plane. There we go, B. And number 15, which option states that line AB lies in plane Q? So if we look at plane Q, and there's A and B, so the points A and B are in the plane, therefore the line containing those points will also lie in plane Q. And there it is, D. If 2 points line a plane, then the entire line containing those points lies in that plane. Number 16, justify the statement with a property of equality or a property of congruence. So it says, if segment AB is congruent to segment CD, then segment CD is congruent to segment AB. So we are taking the initial statement and we're flipping it around. So anytime we do that, that's okay, and that's through the property of symmetry. So the symmetric property. Number 17, justify the statement if angle LMN is congruent to angle XYZ and angle XYZ is congruent to angle TUV, then angle LMN is congruent to angle TUV. And this is the transitive property. So the transitive property states that if A equals B and B equals C, then that means that A has to equal C because they're both equal to B. And that's what's going on here. LMN and TUV will be congruent because they're both congruent to the same angle, XYZ. So now, T is the midpoint of MV, and definition of midpoint or midpoint theorem. State a conclusion that can be drawn from the statements given using the property indicated. So if T is the midpoint of MV, by the definition of midpoint and the midpoint theorem, we can say that, well, let's make a diagram of this. T is the midpoint of MV. Okay, well, we can say that this segment is congruent to that segment if T is the midpoint. So MT must be congruent to VT. Number 19, given U is between S and V, write a true statement. So let's make a segment. We'll put U somewhere between S and V. So by the segment addition postulate, we can say that this length plus this length is equal to the entire length. Or in other words, SU plus UV is equal to SV. Number 20, justify the statement with a property of equality or a property of congruence. Segment JK is congruent to segment JK. So if anything is ever shown being equal to itself or congruent to itself, that is the reflexive property. Reflexive property. Number 21, find the measure of angle 3 using congruent supplements theorem given angle 2 and angle 2 and angle 4 and angle 4 and angle 5 are supplementary, and the measure of angle 4 is equal to 105. So the congruent supplements theorem states that if two angles are supplementary with the same angle, then they will be congruent. So we want to find the measure of angle 3, and we know the measure of angle 4. So angle 4 is 105, and here's the key. Angle 2 and 4 are supplementary. So 4 is supplementary with 2. Likewise, we have a straight line, so we have a linear pair, which forces 3 to be supplementary with 2. So 4 is supplementary with 2, and 3 is supplementary with 2. That forces 3 and 4 to be congruent. So the measure of angle 3 is equal to 105 as well. Another way to show this is if this angle is 105 and it's supplementary with this angle, then 180 minus 105 would be 75. And once again, since we have a straight line and a linear pair is formed, 180 minus 75 takes us back to 105 for the measure of angle 3. So name the definition postular theorem used to justify the following. That angle 4 is congruent to angle 5. So angle 4 is congruent to angle 5 because those are non-adjacent angles formed by two intersecting lines. So we have two lines intersecting right here. These two angles are opposite each other, so they are non-adjacent. They don't share a common side. And by definition, those are called vertical angles. And we know that vertical angles will always be congruent, will always have the same measure by the vertical angles theorem. On number 23, it says theorem 2.10 states that all right angles are blank. And to fill in the blank, that would be congruent. And that's straight from the reading on page 155. The right angle theorems, we have theorem 2.9 perpendicular lines intersect to form four right angles. Theorem 211, perpendicular lines form congruent adjacent angles. Theorem 212, if two angles are congruent and supplementary, then each angle is a right angle. Theorem 213, if two congruent angles form a linear pair, then they are right angles. And the one in question here, Theorem 210, all right angles are congruent. Number 24, name the definition, postulate, or theorem used to justify the following. Given that angle LMN is congruent to angle XYZ, then the measure of angle LMN is equal to the measure of angle XYZ. And this is by the definition of congruent angles. If angles are congruent, then they have the same measure. That is our definition of congruent angles. Number 25, find the measure of angle 8. So we have an expression for 6 and an expression for 7, and we want to find the measure of 8. Well, we know since 6 and 8 are vertical angles, they'll be congruent. So if I can solve for x and substitute back in for the measure of angle 6, then the measure of angle 6 will be my answer because it's the same as the measure of angle 8. So the equation that I need here is by the supplements theorem. Since 6 and 7 form a linear pair, then they will be supplementary. So they will add up to 180. So we have 2x minus 21 plus 3x minus 34 equals 180. And we're solving for x. So we combine our like terms. We get 5x minus 55 is equal to 180. So we add 55 to both sides, and we get 235, and we divide both sides by 5. So we would get 47. Then, like I said before, we want to substitute that back in to find the measure of angle 6, because that will be our answer for the measure of angle 8. So that would be 2 times x, 2 times 47, minus 21. So 2 times 47 would be 94. And if we subtract 21 from that, we would have 73 degrees.